how is it the narcissistic personality disorder only seems to affect a lot of men? If you look in the DSM-5, I believe it's around 60 to 70% of the people that are diagnosed typically align with men. And so you see this consistent pattern, and you've noticed maybe by this time there's like an increasing narcissistic behavior just among men in modern society. Maybe you're wondering why men seem to display more narcissistic traits nowadays and what that actually looks like. Now, is there women that have this? Yes, absolutely. And a lot of those end up looking even more like borderline personality disorder, BPD. But when we talk about narcissistic personality disorder, it's true that a lot of men are narcissistic. And most of the narcissists out there are narcissistic. Most narcissists are men. Okay. So as we talk through a piece of this, I want to talk to you the question of why are men becoming more narcissistic now? Why is this starting to become a fad word, a rise in society that you see this more and more and more? Well, if you guys are new here, my name is Ben Taylor. I'm a self-aware narcissist on this channel providing awareness about narcissistic abuse. I'm the founder of Raw Motivations, the creator of the NARC app, and your guide in the 45-day Clarity Challenge that you can access at claritychallenge.net. Go there today to be able to hear from other survivors, to be able to start your process of breaking free from the trauma bond, breaking out the ruminations, and eradicating the triggers that have been working in your life for such a long period of time, sucking you back in and pulling you back to a toxic relationship. When we talk about this aspect of men becoming more narcissistic and seeing this happen more and more, there's a couple things we need to be able to look at first and foremost. One of them is going to be cultural shifts and social media influence. In the age of social media, where self-presentation, validation are emphasized, men and just people in general oftentimes are more prone to developing different narcissistic traits, of starting to compare to other people, of validation seeking, of looking for different people to be like, oh, look at me, look how great I am. Now, besides that, you also have a lot of cultural shifts. These cultural shifts have been going on for years. It's not like they just started today. They've been going on for years that have set up a lot of the families and the households to start producing different versions of narcissists. Now, what do I mean by that? As the world has changed over the past several decades, it has started to change and pulling away from being agricultural to being more industrial, to being more productive into the tech space, all these other things. And what it's done is it's changed a lot of the family dynamics. In culturally changing the family dynamics, there's less families and there are less people that are actually speaking into the lives of men to have them be men. And as a result, we typically start to raise a lot of entitled liars who end up cheating and doing what they want because they feel entitled, because they didn't get that upbringing that they need to have growing up. You see this happen in families where families are split, where they're broken apart, where they're falling away, where the people that are there should be ones to help lead the kids, but oftentimes are not. And you see this happen in society where as the man got pulled out of the relationship, pulled out of the family dynamic because he was too busy at work, because he was focused on other things, there became less and less of an intentional effort of actually training up the next generation. And so we see more narcissists start to come about now because of what has happened in previous generations. Then you get to places where people just don't talk about it, right? Like people don't talk about their feelings. People don't talk about their emotions. People don't talk about what they're struggling with. This happens all across the board. For me, my particular aspect, it happened a ton inside of Christianity, where people didn't talk about mental health. People didn't talk about narcissism. People didn't talk about things like that. There were never even words that we would use in there. You just had to love God, do better, praise Jesus, and move on. Like there really wasn't practical tools to be able to help people when they were stuck in certain aspects, like someone who's stuck lying. You just needed to love Jesus better and you could work through it. But there wasn't really practical steps of how to be able to change the thought process to open up to having true transformation. So there's a lot of different pieces. We could talk about this a lot, but I want to kind of give like an overview of saying, hey, well, these are two things: social media influence and cultural shifts. Cultural shifts, I think, is one of the biggest ones, because it impacts the family dynamic the most. Oftentimes people are like, is narcissism born or is it formed? And as you look at it, and as you look at typically where narcissists come out of, I believe it's formed. It's formed based on what is seen in the family dynamic. This is why when you have a family that has a narcissistic parent, you're typically going to have your kids either turn out narcissistic or codependent. Typically, that's just what it happens. because you have this ingrained in them early on of this is how it's going to be. This is how I need to protect myself. This is how I need to take care of that person's feelings. This is how I need to, and the list goes on and on. So think of it this way. You might have someone who is obsessed with getting attention from other people. Now, in the social media age, this might be a place of like, oh, like I'm obsessed about gaining followers, of getting likes, of giving comments, of boosting. Like this is typically what we think of. When people think of like narcissism, they're like, oh, that's what it is. This person's taken too many selfies of themselves, so therefore they're a narcissist, right? It doesn't really have anything to do with that. But sometimes you'll see the outworking happen in that way. Now, what also has affected this? Okay, what's affected this a lot is also how stuff has changed dynamic wise in the household, like I was mentioning earlier. Now you start to have women that have stepped up and are starting to produce. And you have men that are stepped up, and then you have men that have decided, yeah, I'm not going to do that anymore. As these different roles in the marriages and the relationships have evolved, there's people that sometimes feel threatened or disoriented. Totally get that. But then there's also narcissists that look to other people to validate who they are or to validate how much they're worth. Let me give an example. A lot of times we will see a narcissistic male that gets with a non-narcissistic female saying, hey, this person makes more money than me. Therefore, if I get with her, I'm going to feel better about myself for not producing, for not making money. And then he gets with her. So typically, like he'll get with this woman who's like running a business, a CEO who's doing great. And she feels like self-confident. She's doing like absolutely great in business. And all of a sudden he realizes when he's with her and when they're in this relationship, it's not osmosis. Like he doesn't feel better about himself because he's now like magically producing more because he's with her. But instead he feels worse about himself because of the fact that he's still showing up the same way and not being a man that actually rises and produces. So then he starts putting her down. He starts belittling. He starts doing small little things to push her down and push her aside so that she lowers her job status, even mentally and emotionally, to where he feels the same or oftentimes superior. Like the whole goal is, I don't feel good enough, so I'm going to bring you down to my level so that I can feel good enough. You see how messed up that is? But that's the thought process. That's the idea. Like if I can't win at this, then you're going to lose at this, then I at least win at losing. That's the whole concept. That's what we see a lot of times where narcissists will try to attack you because they feel threatened of, oh, like I'm not good enough. Instead of actually just growing and rising and developing into the person they're called to be. Like there's not a sense of safety in it. It's like, oh, I'm insecure, so therefore I got to do whatever I need to protect the ego, to look a certain way. Okay, you might see this in the aspect of where your partner is ended up putting you down, being overly controlling, dismissive of your achievements. Like anything like this to put you down while you're growing and rising, he's trying to put you down so that you're actually not growing and rising in that business front. So then you also move into a place of narcissism being a coping mechanism. Okay. Now, narcissism as a whole, a lot of times is coping and even a avoidance piece, a defense mechanism. We've talked about in this couple of ways, not to pity them and not to say, hey, this is okay. Okay. Because I don't believe in that. And I also don't believe in that in my life. Like I wanted pity. I wanted people to feel bad for me. I don't want you to feel bad for me now. I want you to just understand the truth. And if that person is not willing to grow, change, and develop, then you need to move on. You need to focus on someone who actually is willing to work on themselves because they're not willing to work on you. Narcissism sometimes will become a defense mechanism just for the mask, to hide what they're feeling, to hide insecurity, to hide vulnerability, but to put it behind a mask so that they don't have to own up to it, that they don't have it figured out. That they don't have to own up to the fact that they don't know what's going on, that they're not willing to actually be honest with themselves. And so as a result, they're typically lost in this. If they're unwilling to be honest with themselves, there's no possibility of change. And so narcissist then projects, puts the superiority, the self-importance, and shield everything of like, I don't want to get rejected. I don't want to get hurt. Let me put this up so that people don't see who I actually am. That's the whole thing. Let me avoid shame. Let me avoid guilt. Let me avoid all the things that would actually help me heal, that would actually help me grow. Let me avoid those. Very counterintuitive. But a narcissist will run away from the one thing that will actually help them change, and that's being honest. That's it. For a narcissist, it seems almost impossible. For me, I thought it was almost impossible to be honest and to accept accountability. Being able to say the words, I was wrong, blew my mind. In the first 6-7 years of marriage, couldn't say it. Wouldn't come out of my mouth. It would get stuck at the back of my throat and not be able to exit my mouth. I was less right, but to actually say the words, I was wrong, couldn't do it. Never would do it. And so as a result, I'd gaslight, get upset, rage, do all these different things to avoid the conversation so I didn't have to admit that I was actually wrong. Even when I knew I was wrong, I just couldn't admit it. So then you also see a lot of society that reinforces narcissistic traits. It's glorified. It looks great in different aspects of movies and music. It gets great in the aspect of business of wow, that person is really good at achieving stuff. Yeah, because they're narcissistic. You see different narcissistic behaviors getting reinforced and admired for being assertive, being dominant, having self-centered personalities. When in reality, that's not any aspects of a leader. But sometimes people look to that and be like, oh, this person's a good leader. And sometimes this will have positive reinforcement for the narcissist of why would I change anything because my life is working really good? Not this section of, my relationships, but the rest of life, everything's working good. Because I'm getting the praise, I'm getting the admiration, I'm getting the possessions I want, I'm getting all this different success. A lot of times you'll see that be that external validation, and narcissists will disregard any other aspect of things coming up against them. Doesn't really matter. I'm getting what I want. This is where you see narcissists that are self-aware and they just don't care. You're going to see more and more of narcissism come about. Over the next couple of years, over the next couple of months, you're only going to see narcissism get worse. And it's not going to get better. It's only going to get worse. What are you doing to actually prep and plan and prepare yourself to avoid getting in toxic relationships, to avoid having these people come into your life, sideswipe you? You have to know who you are, and you have to know the direction that you're going. If you want to know more about this, I want you to go to claritychallenge.net. We talk about not just breaking you free, but we talk about where you're going, your vision, your values, how to build healthy habits, how to rewire the mindset on a daily basis, how to help you move to the person that you're called to be. So go to claritychallenge.net today.